Chapter 5. The Cry in the Corridor. At first, each day which passed for Mary Lennox was exactly like the others. Every morning she awoke in her tapestried room and found Martha kneeling upon the hearth building her fire. Every morning she ate her breakfast in the nursery, which had nothing amusing in it. And after each breakfast she gazed out of the window across to the huge moor, which seemed to spread out on all sides and climb up to the sky. And after she had stared for a while, she realized that if she did not go out, she would have to stay in and do nothing. And so she went out. She did not know that this was the best thing she could have done. And she did not know that when she began to walk quickly or even to run along the paths and down the avenue, she was stirring her slow blood and making herself stronger by fighting with the wind which swept down from the moor. She ran only to make herself warm, and she hated the wind which rushed at her face and roared and held her back as if it were some giant she could not see. But the big breaths of rough fresh air blown over the heather filled her lungs with something which was good for her whole thin body, and it whipped some red color into her cheeks, and it brightened her dull eyes, and when she did not know anything about it. But after a few days spent almost entirely out of doors, she wakened one morning knowing what it was to be hungry. And when she sat down to her breakfast, she did not glance disdainfully at her porridge and push it away, but she took up her spoon and she began to eat it, and she went on eating it until her bowl was empty. "Thou got on well enough with that this morning, didn't thou?" said Martha. "It tastes nice today." And Mary, feeling a little surprised herself. "It's the air of the moor that's given thee the stomach for the victuals," answered Martha. "It's lucky for thee that thou's got victuals as well as an appetite. There's been 12 in our cottage that had the stomach and nothing to put in it. You go on playing, you, out of doors, every day, and you'll get some flesh on your bones, and you won't be so yeller." "I don't play," said Mary. "I have nothing to play with." "Nothing to play with!" exclaimed Martha. "Our children plays with sticks and stones. They just run around and shouts and looks at things." Mary did not shout, but she looked at things. There was nothing else to do. She walked round and round the gardens and wandered around the paths in the park. Sometimes she looked for Ben Weatherstaff, but though several times she saw him at work, he was too busy to look at her, or he was too sour. Once, when she was walking towards him, he picked up his spade and turned away as if he did it on purpose. One place she went to oftener than any other, and it was the long walk outside the gardens, with the walls round them. There were bare flower beds on either side of it. Against the walls the ivy grew thickly. There was one part of the wall where the creeping dark leaves were more bushy than elsewhere. It seemed as if for a long time that part had been neglected. The rest of it had been clipped and made to look neat, but at this lower end of the walk it had not been trimmed at all. A few days after she had talked to Ben Weatherstaff, Mary stopped to notice this and wondered why it was so. She had just paused and was looking up at a long spray of ivy swinging in the wind when she saw a gleam of scarlet and heard a brilliant chirp. And there, on the top of the wall, perched Ben Weatherstaff's robin, tilting forward to look at her with his small head on one side. "Oh," she cried out, "is it you? Is it really you?" And it did not seem at all strange to her that she spoke to him as if she were sure that he would understand and answer her. And he did answer. He twittered and chirped and hopped along the wall as if he were telling her all sorts of things. It seemed to Mistress Mary as if she understood him too. Though he was not speaking in words, it was as if he said, "Good morning. Isn't the wind nice? Isn't the sun nice? Isn't everything nice? Let's both chirp and hop and twitter. Come on, come on, come on." And Mary began to laugh as she hopped, and he took little flights along the wall as she ran after him. Poor little thin, sallow, ugly Mary. She actually looked almost pretty for a moment. "I like you, I like you," she cried out, pattering down the walk. And she chirped, and she tried to whistle, which last she did not know how to do in the least, but the robin seemed to be quite satisfied, and chirped and whistled back at her. At last he spread his wings and made a daring flight to the top of a tree, where he perched and sang loudly. That reminded Mary of the first time she had seen him. He had been swinging on a treetop then, and she had been standing in the orchard. Now she was on the other side of the orchard and standing in the path outside a wall, much lower down, and there was the same tree inside. "It is the garden. It's in the garden no one can go into," she said to herself. "It's the garden without a door. He lives in there. How I wish I could see what it's like in there." She ran up the walk to the green door she had entered the first morning. Then she ran down the path, through the other door, and then into the orchard. And when she stood and looked up there was the tree on the other side of the wall, and there was the robin just finishing his song and beginning to preen his feathers with his beak. "It is the garden," she said. "I am sure it is." She walked round and looked closely at that side of the orchard wall, but she only found what she had found before, that there was no door in it. Then she ran through the kitchen gardens again and out into the walk outside the long ivy-covered wall. And she walked to the end of it and she looked at it, but there was no door. And then she walked to the other end, looking again, but there was no door. "This is very strange," she said. "Ben Weatherstaff said there was no door, and there is no door. But there must have been one 10 years ago, because Mr. Craven buried the key to it." This gave her so much to think of that she began to be quite interested and feel that she was not sorry that she had come to Misselthwaite Manor. In India, she'd always felt too hot and languid to care much about anything. The fact was that the fresh wind from the moor had begun to blow the cobwebs out of her young brain and to waken her up a little.